I vaguely remember this scene or this line from a show I watched years ago now. And in it, there was a character who was an older doctor, and he was talking to some young people about youth. And just kind of being encouraging and inspiring about, this is a great time of your life, and it's a time to, make changes and to, become a better person and all that kind of stuff. But he was reflecting on and adding to that youth, you find as you get older, is not a set period of time in your life. It's not simply an age. It's an experience that you can have many times in your life, that youth can come back to you as an experience that God gives to you. Well, he doesn't say that in the show, but I'm adding that in. Over and over again in your life. And there isn't a limit to how many times it can happen. So I just want to reflect on that because I was thinking about it today. I think what he's describing, though, is an abstract concept, this experience of youth that is like literal youth by age is an image of. So what are things that you look for in this experience of youth outside of the literal youth? But that is, you can see as a tangible image in literal youth. So it's a time where our minds are developing, that we're learning new things. There's excitement. There's a kind of an adventurous spirit. There's an openness. Key point here is an openness to change. There's changes that are happening whether you like it or not, but there's an openness to change, that your life is going to change, how you live is going to change. And there's a willingness, a need to and a willingness to accept sacrificing things from the way you've been living to that point. Because as a youth, you have to sacrifice even good things from your childhood or attachments that you have, or maybe bad things like you can get attached to bad habits or bad situations. You could be in a toxic situation and you can be attached to it. Youth is a time to be recognizing those things, reflecting on how you've done so far, what things that you maybe didn't have as much control over, reflecting on that, learning from it, understanding what was going on, and then being willing to sacrifice those things to move to the new stage in life, to your next stage of life. I think there's also a healthy curiosity about the future. It's a time to be thinking about your vocation, about what God created you to be, what your real purpose in life is, what your mission in life is, and an eagerness to do that, to embrace it, an eagerness to change yourself for the better, to grow as a person. But all of these characteristics, and you could add more, I'm sure, they're things that you can experience in life lots of times. It doesn't have to be, only when you're in your teen years or young adulthood or whatever. I personally feel like I've experienced this at least once, where I feel like it was in the last few years, like a return to youth, where there's I felt like my mind expanded. I feel like God expanded my mind. God showed me new things. I learned new things. I was able to reflect on my years to this point and see them in a new light and understand better what was going on than I did while I was living them, which is something that happens when you become an adult. You can look back over your childhood and with new understanding that you didn't have while you were living your childhood, but now you're looking at it as an adult and you can see it. And I feel like that now, we're like, okay, I've grown and I can now look at the years, my 20s or whatever, and say, I can see them in a new light. I understand what was going on so much better than I did while I was actually living them. And those experiences of being willing to change, seeing that changes need to happen, that God is drawing you to change, God is drawing you to growth, reflecting again on your purpose in life and what God made you to be and how best you go about doing that. So I think if you have that experience in life, some of you, this is probably already resonating, that you know what I'm talking about. But if not, and if you're a young person, you maybe don't have much except actual youth to draw on. But watch for that as you get older. Watch for this experience of youth, because I think it's something that God gives to people because he wants you to grow. We experience literal youth because it's time for us to grow up, to become adults, right? That God puts that in our nature. So there's a point where we are no longer children and we become adults, and it's time to move on, and you have to make sacrifices and you have to be willing to change and to grow and all that. And I think God gives it to us in the spiritual life too, even as adults, for the same purposes, that it's time to really come into our own, to recognize what it is God's asking us to do right now, to become more of what we were called to be, because you can always become more of what God called you to be, and go deeper into your vocation as a Christian or as whatever it is in your state in life. But we have to be open to that change. We have to be willing to make sacrifices. We have to be willing to learn, to be taught, to be able to look back on the past with new understanding, even if you don't like what you see. And then to accept whatever consolations and everything that God gives you, which I think he probably will if you're having this experience, kind of consolations, a lightness, an ability, and graces to accept the graces he's offering you to grow, to become a better person. So be open to new understanding, be open to change, be willing to make sacrifices of good and bad things in your past, be willing to accept new understanding of the things that have happened, and move forward with eagerness, with a sense of adventure, with a healthy curiosity about where God's leading you next. And again, this experience is something you could have, who knows, I mean, as many times as God wants to give it to you. So it doesn't matter if you are, 20 or 80, you could still have this experience of youth. Be ready for it and accept it as a grace, and be willing to correspond to that grace.